Hello, everyone. Thanks for having us here today. Really excited to represent our group today. I just want to take a moment to introduce ourselves. I'll go first. My name's Kevin Clack. Starting my 5th year at graduate school at UCLA, working with Hoek and Shaily Mahendra. I've really dedicated the last 5 years to improving the economics of wastewater recycling. So improving access to safe and clean drinking water. I'll pass it over.
My name is Kshitija. The K is silent, if you were confused. I've also started my PhD program at the same time as Kevin, working on the wastewater treatment project we're going to be talking about today. In addition to that, I also focus more on microorganisms, which we'll be talking about. I work with fungi, algae, and bacteria, so doing certain genomic studies on those as well, in addition to this project.
Perfect. So we look forward to talking with you. Please feel free to ask any questions. We're going to introduce the combined aerobic membrane bacterial-algal reactor. We call this CAMBAR. It achieves energy positive, carbon negative, and economically favorable wastewater recycling. So let's just introduce the problem here. Clean water, it's a precious resource. Of course, as we know, unfortunately, supplies are limited. Over the next 50 years, 40 to 50% of our groundwater basins, of our water resources in the United States are expected to experience frequent shortages due to climate-related stress and population growth. So what do we do? Where do we turn to when our traditional established drinking water resources become less and less reliable as the decades go on? So typically we are using our surface water, lakes, rivers, and our groundwater, the aquifers beneath our feet. We can turn to brackish desalination. So this is salty water. It's less salty than the ocean. There's large basins, maybe in Texas and in the Midwest. We don't really have too many of those in Southern California. You can turn to seawater desalination, which of course is really energy intense. We're pulling all of the salt and minerals out of the ocean water. And of course, not everyone has access to an ocean. So looking at the cost and the energy intensity, wastewater recycling is our next best option to provide safe and clean drinking water. Let's see. So even though wastewater recycling is already our next best move, established processes for wastewater recycling are still expensive, they're energy intense, and they are greenhouse gas emitting. So in order to manage almost 15,000 facilities, this is just wastewater treatment plants, 15,000 wastewater treatment plants in the United States, it costs roughly $108 billion per year. It's energy intense. It accounts for 3% of our US energy production. And it is greenhouse gas emitting. It's also 3% of our annual emissions. So let's talk about why it is energy intense, expensive, and greenhouse gas emitting. So wastewater contains carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus at a high level. We don't want these molecules entering our surface waters and polluting our environment. So there's a 2-century-old philosophy of, one, we just got rid of the wastewater out of the city. We realized that's polluting the environment. So we brought the microbes that grow in this polluted wastewater upstream into a reactor. We still saw that algae was growing out there. So we'll talk about this a little bit, but we are growing respiring bacteria. They breathe oxygen just like you and I, and they breathe out CO2. In order to provide this oxygen to this bacteria, we're using energy-intense mechanical blowers. So this is just a figure of a blower right here in the center of the screen. It accounts for roughly 40 to 50% of the energy demand of wastewater treatment. Let that sink in. In order for the bacteria to breathe, we have to provide enough oxygen, and that accounts for 50% of the energy demand. It also accounts for 12 to 24% of the overall operating costs.
So that's where we come in. This project was conceptualized almost a decade ago by our professors, and there's been many iterations we've focused on, but specifically with the funding we've received from the Climate Action Initiative, we've been able to focus on CAMBAR, our combined aerobic membrane bacterial-algal reactor system. So Kevin mentioned that bacteria breathe in oxygen like us, and they breathe out carbon dioxide. Algae, on the other hand, they're just like plants. They're going to breathe in carbon dioxide do photosynthesis, and release oxygen. And so we're capitalizing on this synergy between both microorganisms. The carbon dioxide provided by the bacteria gets used up by the algae that in turn provide oxygen for the bacteria to respire. And like I mentioned, algae are just like plants. They also need fertilizer in the form of nitrogen and phosphorus. So we're talking about a bunch of nutrients. Domestic waste, for example, primarily contains a lot of carbon because that's what we eat most frequently. A lot of nitrogen and phosphorus, your dishwasher runoff, or human waste, protein. So essentially, algae and bacteria are a dynamic duo for solving that problem. And then because of this synergy, we're going to see reduced aeration costs, and we're going to be able to retrofit existing systems. So because we're not reinventing the wheel, we're just using microorganisms in similar existing conventional wastewater treatment plants, we should down the line be able to partner with existing water treatment plants and have our technology be compatible with their resources. So this is what our reactor in our lab looks like. You can see there's a lot going on, but we have a 2-zone CAMBAR reactor. On the right, you see a large reactor with wrapped LED lights because, again, algae need light to photosynthesize. And on the left, you see a smaller reactor without light. So algae have actually, they require a really strong sleep cycle, something we should all aspire for optimal functioning. And essentially, we have an internal recirculation pump that allows for both the bacteria and algae to cycle between the dark and light cycle. During photosynthesis, we're able to produce oxygen. And so that oxygen powers the nitrification of ammonia to nitrate, and it allows for our algae and bacteria to take up excess phosphorus into their cells. In the dark phase, all of this nitrate can get converted to nitrogen gas. We're also going to focus more on carbon removal, and then we release some phosphorus only for it to be taken back up by the microbes in the light cycle. And then using this dark and light cycle, we're going to be able to go from dirty water, which you see in the tube on the left, to clean water that's completely particle and bacteria and algae free. That's just a video, but it looks very similar to the picture. We have our synthetic wastewater on the left in the little tub, and then our reactor that's running here. So Kevin mentioned also that our next steps are going to be to focus on recycling wastewater and reusing it. And for reuse, there's certain regulations and target limitations for treated wastewater that we need to meet. So there needs to be a certain concentration of carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus in the water that's treated, only after which it can be reused. And in the last 3 to 6 months, we've been seeing that compared to the influent wastewater, which is the wastewater we synthetically prepare in lab, our effluent or treated wastewater is consistently below the target limitation. So we're exceeding our performance metrics.
Let's talk a little about what makes this energy positive, carbon negative, and economically favorable. So we're going to compare conventional wastewater treatment, its equivalent treatment, but with a membrane bioreactor, which is basically a submerged membrane filter, which provides high-quality effluent ready to be treated for reuse. And then, of course, CAMBAR, our photosynthetically assisted membrane bioreactor. So we can see here that from an energy perspective on the left, we are multiplying the energy production through the growth of algae biomass. So not only are we growing bacteria, we're now growing algae. In wastewater treatment, we take this biomass, we call this biomass, we digest it. There's other emerging technologies, but in short, we produce energy from it. And then we can reuse that electricity and heat on site and or export it. So CAMBAR has a net energy export of roughly half a kilowatt hour per cubic meter of wastewater treated. That can vary based on the concentration of wastewater. This is kind of an average strength wastewater. From a greenhouse gas perspective, really a big one right off the bat is that we are mitigating nitrous oxide emissions. That's a compound that has 298 times the greenhouse gas emitting, 100 times the impact in comparison. I need to restate that. It has 298 times the impact of carbon dioxide on global warming in comparison to over a 100-year period. So we mitigate nitrous oxide emissions, but also through the export of electricity and heat, we mitigate fossil-based energy production. So let's talk about what this looks like at the scale of Los Angeles. We mentioned that this is a technology that we can use to retrofit existing systems. We do expect that we'd be able to produce a net cost benefit, a net operating profit. This is something we're still working on and modeling. The energy export at the scale of Los Angeles is enough to power 23,000 homes consistently. It is carbon negative. We mitigate the equivalent emissions of roughly 26,000 cars, again, consistently throughout the year, all while providing safe and clean drinking water, which meets roughly 80% of the daily demand. That's really based off of the limitations of reverse osmosis. You recover roughly 80% of the water for drinking water. And that's it. We'll take any questions.
Thank you.
Tons of questions, actually. Number one, would you drink it?
With a little bit more processing, yes.
Okay, what they have at Balboa Lake in Sherman Way, that area, is that what has gone through similar process like yours? Because I know that was like toilet to tap.
Can you repeat that one more time?
Are you familiar with the Balboa Lake, the man-made lake that DWP has? Toilet.
Okay, yes.
That was called toilet to tap. Is that similar to what you guys are doing?
Yeah, so in a different presentation that we have given in the past, we like to say that toilet to tap is starting to gain a more positive connotation in society. We're learning more and more about the technologies that are used to treat this water up to drinking water standards. I'll call it the boundary condition of this technology is pre-treating it so that it can go into reverse osmosis. So then you still need the same technology that's used for desalination or wastewater recycling, which is that reverse osmosis system. It doesn't let anything through except the water, really, right? So yes, I would drink it as soon as it goes through RO.
Okay, thank you.
What types of contaminants do you treat with this system, with the reactor?
We're not focusing on industrial contaminants right now. We're focusing more on municipal or domestic wastewater. So along with just normal daily contaminants, we would mostly using this technology be focusing on the nitrogen, phosphorus, and carbon removal. Again, like Kevin mentioned, the reverse osmosis treatment, some membrane work will remove other smaller contaminants that the microbes aren't removing.
I could touch a little bit on how we are placed as these technologies emerge. So a lot of PFAS, for instance, these carcinogenic compounds, microplastics are another thing. A lot of these end up in the biosolids, right? So today we use anaerobic digesters, which is just a big anaerobic vessel. There's no oxygen in it, and so these microbes produce methane. Still, the PFAS and microplastics will remain there. If we land apply them, eventually they will accumulate where the biosolids land. So we're established in a place where, because we're multiplying the biomass production through algae, we actually are aligned well with some other emerging technologies, such as hydrothermal liquefaction, pyrolysis, gasification, or maybe even incineration. These are thermochemical technologies, which are maybe TRL 7 at this point. And so as we're producing more biomass, these much smaller footprint technologies, such as hydrothermal liquefaction, can become favorable in partnership with this technology. And those thermochemical technologies actually will degrade PFAS or microplastics into their fundamental compounds. So it's not something we're focused on, but just want to make a note on that.
Right, so maybe this is a similar or follow-up question. It looks like you guys made some wastewater to treat here. And are there any specific conditions that need to be met for this technology to work? And I would consider just driving around and grabbing a bucket of wastewater from each of the different facilities to show that it can be met in a real world application. But why did you make your own, and would it work over all the different types of wastewater that we see over the course of a number of years?
That's an excellent question. Something we're trying to focus on going forward is actually piloting our technology with a real wastewater treatment plant. So we'll be using wastewater treatment plant locally somewhere in LA and run our technology with that. The reason we're making our own synthetic wastewater in lab is mostly because we're not equipped as a lab to deal with human waste. I think we would have to get a lot more certifications done in order to bring real wastewater into our labs. Just a mask. No, but pretty much that's probably why we started with synthetic wastewater. We've made sure that all of the nutrient concentrations match what's available or accessible in local wastewater treatment plants. It's just to keep the toxic materials out.
Match at a certain time, like an average, or match at all times? Because the idea is it would have to work all the time if you get clean or dirty wastewater, et cetera.
All times. I see we're going over on time here. We're going to go pilot at a local wastewater treatment facility, move this exact system over there, and it will encapsulate the daily variations and the seasonal variations. Thank you.
Thank you so much.